I started preaching full time at the church that I grew up at, the Somerset Church of Christ, and I'm still there to this day. 2 years into ministry in 2011, my youngest sister came to me at the age of 21, and she disclosed to me that when she was very young, she was sexually abused by our father. He was the former minister at the Somerset Church of Christ. In fact, he preached there for 27 years. Absolutely devastated us because we had no clue, never suspected that he was abusing anybody, let alone little minor children. My mom and I both reported him to our local police department, and they called him in for questioning, and he ended up confessing to 23 victims that were all prepubescent, and he had been sexually abusing them all of his adult life. So for 40 plus years, he sexually assaulted dozens, but we suspect he has hundreds of victims, because we know of many more who came forward who were not part of the 23 that he confessed to. So we suspect he had hundreds of victims, and we had no clue. So I kind of wrestled with a whole lot of things and found out of my dad's own mouth that he had produced victims, very young victims, in our church up to the time of his arrest. So, not only were we dealing with this devastating blow of finding out that the person who we thought we knew was a serial child rapist, but he also produced victims within my church. And so we had just so many layers and so many components to trying to process and figure this out. So in a nutshell, that's my story. And I now still do full-time ministry, but I do full-time advocacy work and research on the side.
You talk about your sister in the book coming forward, and about how you as a family, well, you in particular and your mother, were not aware of what was going on. And you kind of talk in the book and kind of wrestle with reflecting back on a childhood that sure seemed to be a great childhood from your perspective, and who was this guy the whole time, and the kind of loss that you experience. It's kind of a weird loss, because like loss is typically like real time. Like I just lost something and I had it a minute ago and now I don't. Yeah. Death of a loved one or something. And this is like retroactive loss. Like how do you process that?
It was like this instant identity crisis. So everything that we thought we knew, not only about my dad, was now in question, but everything about us, everything about my childhood was in question. I started questioning things like, was it possible that I was abused too? And I just have repressed memories, because with my sister, that's what had happened with her. She literally did not remember abuse until just before she came and disclosed it to me. Some of those memories started resurfacing, and they were very real. And, she began to remember things that she literally had no memories for. So I wrestled with that. Was it possible that he abused all of us and we just didn't know it? So it's this instant identity crisis that there's not really any way to process it. You just have to kind of, it's just there. It's present. And I talk about that some in the book, where, I would go to touch my wife, and I would look down and I would see my father's hands. And it wasn't that I was imagining it. It was literally a part of me. It was so real in my brain. When I would go to change my daughter's diaper, I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore, because I would see and feel my father's hands going down to touch my daughter. So, those are the ripple effects, just some of them. I mean, there are thousands of ripple effects and they never end. So, you're right. It's not this instant loss. Like a death is final. When you lose somebody, it's tragic, it's awful, it's hard to process, but it's final. What the end is. That they're no longer with you, and that's a reality. With this, it's just this ongoing, perpetual, in our minds, we're always thinking what's going to be next.
When you think about people who experience things like your sister, who had no memory of this, or people like yourself who had no awareness that these things were going on? Like, what enables someone to pull that off? Like, what enables someone to go about that in a way? Like, what should we be aware
Yeah.
of?
Yeah, so that was really the driving force behind all of this, and that's what I talk about, this haunting effect. I was haunted by the fact that we all missed it. You know, it wasn't like one or two or a handful of people were just naive and, you know, grew up in a Christian environment and, you know, they just didn't have a context for this kind of stuff. I mean, he literally, for 40 years of his life, abused dozens that we know of, victims, hundreds of times each. You're talking thousands of times that he actually physically was full on molesting and raping children. He did it. He operated at a 100% success rate. Never were there times that people suspected he was abusing, that, you know, people called it into question. So I began picking up every book that I could find on pedophilia from every top researcher, and you know, I read some fantastic books, but there were these big gaping holes in the research. Some of it fits, but not all of it fits. And so, you know, researchers really try to study pedophiles, and you know, at the end of the day, they'll all say something like, "It's so hard to really identify them because they're so sophisticated that basically good luck." That wasn't good enough for me. You know, that didn't fit with the God who I know. Especially some of the things that Jesus says about warning people to look out for deceptive people. In Matthew 7, he calls them ravenous wolves. And he says, you will recognize them by their fruit. He says it twice. So I really was haunted by the fact that we all missed it. And so I started researching not only my pedophile father, who I still stay in touch with, but I started researching us. What is it about us that makes us susceptible, one, to being abused, but two, for the people who are not abused, what makes us blind to that abuse? Because a lot of this abuse happens right in front of our eyes. And I'm talking full-on molestation. Children are being physically molested right in front of us. My dad did it. He was writing casually about it in letters from prison. And most people don't believe that because we believe in our heart that we're really perceptive. And I'll put a caveat in there, especially in the church. Churches have been the most difficult group of people to convince that people molest children right in front of us, and we're blind to it. There's this inherent idea that we're well educated in the Christian community, that we read our Bibles a lot, that we know God, that we're in tune with the Holy Spirit. All of that is true, but it negates the science behind how we stay blind to abuse. And abusers know this. One of the reasons why churches are really enticing for them. And the abuse in plain sight became something that I really started to focus on and spend my time researching, because the abuse that happens in isolation, we're never going to see it unless we have hidden cameras. Excuse me. Unless we have hidden cameras set up, we are never going to see that abuse. But the abuse that happens in front of us, and it happens often, that at least gives us something tangible, that if we understand the techniques of abusers and what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, what their techniques are step by step, that allows us to see some of the techniques that they're using before they're full on abusing that child, where we can step in and we can intervene. And it's effective. I can tell you from experience, it's highly effective.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people scratching their heads going, that would never happen to me. That would never happen to my kid. I would be aware.
Yep.
I would see it coming. Abuse in front of me, like in the book, you describe some of this. And so can you make that somewhat tangible?
Yeah, one of the videos that I play when I do trainings is it's a TEDx video by Apollo Robbins. Apollo Robbins is he's an entertainer in Las Vegas, but he does close-up magic, and particularly he became famous when he literally stripped Jimmy Carter's Secret Service agents of their credentials. He took their badges. He took basically everything but their guns. He took the keys to Jimmy Carter's motorcade off of Secret Service agents. They were in the back room. They were kind of waiting for, I think he was going to do a performance, and, they just happened to be in the neighborhood or whatever. And so Apollo Robbins talks about this. He talks about how the Secret Service agents were like, we're highly trained. We are the most trained people in the United States of America. There's no way that you could strip us. So Apollo Robbins just had this casual conversation with them. And then the next thing, he starts pulling out some of their things. And he was like, does this belong to you? Does this belong to you? Does this belong to you? And they were absolutely floored. And that's what made him famous. And these guys were shocked that he was able to do it and strip them of all these things. And they didn't have a clue. They never felt it. They never saw it. So Apollo Robbins has this TEDx video, and I would really encourage people to start there, because most of us, myself included, are like, no, there's no way. If somebody like Apollo Robbins came in front of me, or if an abuser was trying to get to one of my children, I'm really aware. I'm an aware person. I would know it. I would see it. I would feel it. I would be aware. Science says otherwise. And so I would encourage people to watch that video, because seeing is believing. It's an 8-minute video, and it tells a really important story. And so that, that quest really started me down this path to try to find anything that was written in the field of pedophilia about abuse in plain sight, specifically the techniques. There's a lot of stuff that's written about it that acknowledges that it happens, but it'll say things like this: abusers even get so brazen that they'll abuse children in front of their parents. Well, that tells me nothing about how they do it. It tells me nothing about how they get away with it. It tells me nothing about technique. It tells me nothing about how to see it. So I started looking for books, and I came up completely empty-handed. And then I discovered a book by 2 neuroscientists, Dr. Stephen Macknick and Susana Martinez Conde, who are husband and wife. And they wrote a book about the neuroscience of magic, what our everyday deceptions tell us about, or what magic tells us about our everyday deceptions. And I'm telling you, Matt, if I would overlay Doctors Macknick and Martinez Conde's book over top of the letters that I was receiving from prison, where my dad was describing how he was able to abuse victims in front of us, it was almost a carbon copy. And so I had this big aha moment, and I was like, holy cow, like there is real, genuine, legitimate science. Like abuse is not just loss of control and giving into urges, but it's a science, it's an art, and it's rehearsed, it's practiced over and over and over, where abusers literally rehearse this and get it down so pat that they will not make mistakes. And it's intentional. They're abusing their victims in front of adults intentionally. So yeah, I would urge people, definitely watch that video by Apollo Robbins, his TEDx talk. It is phenomenal.
Kind of amazing, right? I mean, when you think about a magician, like practice to do it in front of people, right? And and them not understand what's going on. That makes perfect sense. You talk about like pats on the behind and things like that in front of parents, and we normally talk about like grooming behaviors, but you talk more about like testing behaviors.
Yeah. And I'm not the only one who talks about this, but I think I'm probably the only researcher who's put so much time and attention on this. And I reject grooming as the primary thing that abusers do. Now, there is grooming that certainly goes on, but primarily they're not grooming their victims. So grooming is, Merriam-Webster, I'm just going to read the definition. I wrote an article about this on my website, by the way, back in 2019. The title of the blog post is Why I Talk About Abusers Testing Instead of Grooming. So Merriam-Webster, to groom is to get into readiness for a specific objective, to prepare. To test, the definition is to make a preliminary test or survey as of a reaction or interest before embarking on a course of action. So it sounds like a subtle difference, but it's really not. Grooming is taking this long process and kind of, you hear about abusers grooming both the adults and the children, and they groom them to trust them, and they groom them to believe that they're like kind of like these superheroes, and they're needed in their life and so forth. And it's like this long, drawn out process that could take months or even years. I reject virtually everything about that, because abusers don't do that. Your average abusers, they don't groom people into trusting them. They're just trusted people. It's not a long, drawn out process. Talk to any victim of child sexual abuse, and they'll be like, my goodness, one day they just started abusing me. They just targeted me and started abusing me. It's really quick. So testing is this notion of making a preliminary test to find out, what's the reaction both from the child and to the parent, before embarking on a course of action. They know what the goal is. They know what the end goal is. They just got to figure out, is this a susceptible child? And are the parents susceptible? Will the parents remain blind to the abuse? From there, it's just literally it's conducting or doing their practiced, rehearsed techniques. And so that's why I use that analog of magicians. Think about magicians. If you've ever watched a stage magician get on stage, and whether it's on TV or live, look at the people who they bring up on stage. They'll walk into the audience, 9 times out of 10, they're going to walk into the audience, and you'll see them constantly touching. And if you watch a TEDx video with Apollo Robbins, you'll see he's constantly touching and shaking hands and things like that. He rejects the first 2 people, and the third one, he's like, come on up, Joe, And so I go back and I analyze that with my audiences, and I'm like, why did he reject the first 2 people? And it's literally a 15-second encounter with each of them. 15 to 20 seconds with Joe, and he's like, come on up, Joe. So, if you understand the science behind it, if you understand the techniques, you'll know, the first person, when Apollo Robbins sticks his hand out, there's a hesitation. It's a split second, but there's a hesitation. And then this guy, Apollo asks him a question, and the guy hesitates and kind of looks at him like, yeah, I don't really trust you, dude. The next person, he goes to shake the woman's hand, and her first reaction is she sticks her hand out, but she kind of leans back a little bit. Joe, the final guy, Apollo Robbins goes to shake his hand. This guy leans forward, and he's just you can tell he's wrapped around Apollo's finger. 15 to 20 seconds with each of these people. Did he groom Joe? No. He tested him, and he knew. Yeah. Magicians intuitively and scientifically know who's susceptible to, who's going to remain blind, who's going to go along with the show, who's going to be wrapped around their finger. And from there, it's just, it's called, the neuroscientists, Stephen Macknick and Susana Martinez Conde, they talk about the spotlight of attention. From there, Apollo Robbins just holds their spotlight of attention, and you can see it happening on stage. And he's doing it with you as you're watching the video. He's holding your spotlight of attention. And it's phenomenal what they get away with in front of you. So, abusers are doing the same thing. When they go up and they talk to people, they introduce themselves. There are certain benign testing techniques that they do that they will know. My dad says within 30 seconds, he'll identify every potential victim in that room. Now that's a child. Then he has to start matching that child to the right adult, because an adult like me, who's hyper aware, hyper trained, I live and breathe this stuff. An abuser is going to know that, and they're going to know it pretty quickly. So, what abusers have to do is not just find the right vulnerable child, but they need to find the right vulnerable adults that belong to that child. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it really does. And I was really kind of stunned by that statement in the book, the 30-second idea that he's about, finish that thought, but walking into a room, taking 30 seconds and just saying, okay, probably that one. Why is your dad sharing all this? Is it just because he's the spotlight? Is it?
It's kind of this double-edged sword, because while I'm getting invaluable information, he's fantasizing and loving reliving the abuse. And that's, theologically, I think this is where we really need to get this right in the church, and we really need to wrap our minds around it, because virtually everywhere I go, churches use language like, isn't it a shame your dad fell into sin? Isn't it a shame that he wrestled with this addiction? Isn't it a shame that he slid down this path? It's this language that's describing their crimes in the same way that you and I wrestle with sin. And all of us know what it's like to wrestle with sin. All of us do. Name a sin, and we understand, we comprehend what it is to wrestle with that and to be racked with guilt and shame. That is not how abusers think. That is not how they're wired. Scientifically, again, people who are true, genuine sociopaths and psychopaths, when you get into the realm of psychopathy, where there is no conscience, their pleasure centers light up like a Christmas tree while they're abusing their victims. My dad, I spoke to victims of his, and, people who wanted to talk to me about some of the things just to process. I won't ever share specific details of any of that ever. But what I learned was my dad, who on the outside is like this soft-spoken, even when I visit him in prison, he sits like this and like he's all, slumped down and like soft-spoken. When I talk to his victims, I hear this side where, as tears were streaming down their face, that's when things got gruesome. He derived pleasure, and all abusers derive pleasure when they know they're inflicting harm on innocent people. That's what motivates them. We've got to understand, this is not falling into sin. This is not wrestling with temptation. This is not attraction to minor children and they just can't help themselves. This is highly sophisticated. They're highly motivated. They're highly skilled, and they're very, very technical with how they abuse and how they get away with it. So until we really wrap our minds around that, we're going to do things like have known predators come into the church, registered sex offenders, where I see these lousy covenants. I can't say enough bad things about these covenant agreements that give anonymity to registered sex offenders. They're on a public registry for a reason, and churches circumvent the law by giving anonymity to people who are on a public registry, and they assign babysitters to them and tell them, well, we're not going to let you go in the children's wing, but we're going to let you sit out here in the sanctuary where there's no supervision of kids. And we're going to put one person sitting on either side of you, or just one person who sits beside you. Because again, it's that assumption they would never do anything as long as there are eyes watching them. Well, I have news for you. That's where pedophiles do most of their work. So yeah, until we really wrap our minds around that and understand, like, they're not wired like you and me. And the Bible has so much to say about it, Matt. So much to say about deceivers. They're in a whole nother category from any other sin. And the Bible never talks about rehabilitation. It never talks about repentance. It never talks about bringing them back. It never talks about giving them community. Always the clear-cut message is, I'm going to warn you about deceitful people. Have nothing to do with them. Avoid such people. There's a good reason for that.
What you're saying is that a pedophile comes to a church, a sex offender comes to a church, someone on the registry, and they're saying, hey, I'm just looking for a place to worship. And the leadership maybe finds out, maybe this person probably doesn't tell them, but let's say they find out, and then they say, hey, we'll just make an agreement with you because we do believe in rehabilitation. We do believe in genuine repentance, and everyone should have a chance to find Jesus and worship freely, et cetera, et cetera. So we value these things, then we're going to give you a shot, given a covenant that the congregation is not informed of, that the parents have no knowledge of. We're not broadcasting this for privacy reasons, et cetera, et cetera. And is this about right? Because when you just said covenant, I just want people to understand like the scope. Is this kind of the setup?
Yes. Yeah. So, and I'm not I'm not targeting church leaders, and I'm not calling them out and saying that they're foolish or anything like that. I think people genuinely don't know because they're not educated. They've not sat or stood toe to toe with an abuser, and they don't know how sophisticated and how dedicated they are to producing victims. They are serial abusers. Every pedophile is a serial abuser. There is no such thing as one victim. It does not exist. Researchers, read any of the top books on pedophilia. They all say the same thing. Secular researchers, 100% of them will say there is no rehabilitation for adult child sexual predators. There is no such thing as healing them. There is no such thing as rehabilitation. We can control them somewhat, but there is no rehabilitation. It does not exist. That's a hard message for Christians to hear, especially when it's the person who they see like up leading singing, and the person who's preaching or is an elder at a church. It's so hard for them to wrap their mind around what they thought they knew about this person being a serial rapist and a serial monster. So I bring it back to this. One, if churches are thinking about bringing in pedophiles, first and foremost, we've got to define repentance, but not just repentance. We got to listen to what the Bible says about repentance. John the Baptist, prime example. John the Baptist, I always ask churches when I train, I'm like, what did John the Baptist, how did he introduce Jesus? Because that's important. He could have chose a million different ways to introduce Jesus. How did he do it? 100% of the time I've heard churches say, behold the Lamb of God. That is not how John the Baptist introduced Jesus. John the Baptist said to Jesus, to Jesus, behold the Lamb of God. To the crowd in the Gospel of Matthew, John the Baptist starts this way. This is his introduction to Jesus. You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? And then he goes on and he talks about his threshing fork is in his hand. He's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. He's going to gather the wheat together and store that in his barns. The chaff he's going to throw into this unquenchable fire. And John the Baptist, that's his introduction to Jesus. It's the separation of the fraudulent people, the wolves, the people who masquerade as children of light, who look like us, talk like us, sing like us. Jesus is separating them. That's what he's here to do for the protection of innocent people. So, then John the Baptist says, bear fruit in keeping with repentance. He doesn't tell them to repent. He says, bear fruit in keeping with your repentance. Okay. I ask churches when they have these covenant agreements, what are the fruits of the repentance? Well, they agreed to this covenant and they signed it, and they agreed to have the accountability partner. I say, no. Not how is this abuser being compliant? That's compliance. I'm talking about what are the fruits of repentance. Given the crime and the sin, this person serially masqueraded as somebody who they weren't. They pretended they were somebody they were not in order to gain access to a very young prepubescent child who could not know any better, who could not defend themselves, and they raped them. Over and over and over and over again. They proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that they cannot be in the presence of a child without turning that child into a victim. They can't do it. It's not, they didn't go to prison for thinking thoughts about a child. They went to prison because they followed through with it. They actually did it. So what are the fruits of repentance for that person? And then when you ask that question, it's this blank space, because we don't think about that. We don't train people to think that way in the church. So, fruits of repentance for somebody who serially rapes a child. And by the way, I'm not saying that, we just cast them off and have nothing to do with them ever again. I am fully open to the idea of all people coming to repentance. I want people to come to repentance. But because I want it to happen doesn't mean that it is happening. So we have to be careful to make that distinction between what we want to see or what we hope to see and what's actually happening. So, a repentant pedophile would come to church leaders and say, I have zero business ever being in the presence of a child again. I want to have a relationship with God. I want to have a relationship with other Christians. But given my past and what I did over and over and over again, do not ever put me anywhere near a child. That means in person. That means online. That means I will not have internet at my house. I will have zero access, period, to any minor child for the rest of my life. And I need you to hold my feet to the fire. That would be step number one. I've never seen that happen.
The last time we talked, I think you gave an average number or kind of like a ballpark for numbers of victims, and it's extremely high. Like that really surprised me.
Yeah.
Do you still have an idea of that?
Yeah. So these statistics kind of, they ebb and flow and they're all over the place in research. But, if you kind of take an average of all of them, it's about 150 victims. That's not instances of abuse. That's number of children. 150 is the average before they ever get caught, if they ever get caught. So many abusers never get caught. And so we don't know. The only thing we know is when they die, we have all these victims who start coming out of the woodwork saying, I was sexually abused by that person. So it's really, really difficult to get any kind of consistent statistics on that. But kind of piecing those all together, and from interviews from pedophiles in prison, that number is about 150 victims. And each of those victims, keep in mind, they're abusing each one of those dozens or up to hundreds of times each. So you're talking tens of thousands of instances of horrific, like the worst possible scene that you could paint in your mind. It's a battlefield. That's what these people are doing. I mean, this is not falling into temptation. This is not slipping up. This is not letting your urges get the best of you. I mean, this is highly sophisticated, highly technical, and they are dedicated to it.
So I kind of back out in my mind, like if we kind of reverse engineer some of this, well, that's the preacher, that's an elder, he's a song leader. What we're saying is that's a trusted individual. And what you're saying is,
look at all the good that they've done in their life. You'll hear that theme over and over. But look at all the good they've done. Doesn't matter. That tells us nothing about their heart.
Right. And this is not to say cast doubt on every single person in a trusted position, right?
No, not at all.
At the same time, that would be exactly what someone who has these desires, these urges, these temptations, that's exactly where they would place themselves, right? That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. The majority of, in the church, the majority of pedophiles that we discover are in church leadership of some sort. So preachers, elders, deacons, even volunteer positions, youth ministers, paid youth ministers, volunteers in Bible classes, volunteers for youth events. Those sorts of positions where there's ready access to victims and you're in a trusted position to begin with, they migrate to those positions. So, the vast majority of pedophiles, at least, in research and in my experience, when I consult with churches, the vast, overwhelming majority of cases, almost 100%, when there's an abuser or an alleged abuser, they're in church leadership, and they're beloved. It's not like they're some weirdo who the church hired and they had reservations about it. These are deeply, deeply trusted and loved people, like my father was.
So we overinflate our sense of being able to predict these things or see these things or know it's happening, and we have an overinflated sense of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote that book, Talking to Strangers, this really good book. And he talks about how all these people Sandusky and all these different people, kind of got away with various things. And then the flip side is sometimes we're mistrusting when we should be more trusting. And it's, it seems like we really don't have a good handle on our own the accuracy of our intuitions or ability to analyze these kinds of things. And that's leveraged against us.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So, it's not just about listening to intuition, because intuition, I mean, it's important. Gavin de Becker wrote one of the most fantastic books, that exist out there, called The Gift of Fear. And it's talking about tapping into your intuition. And, Gavin de Becker grew up in a highly volatile, very violent home, and he learned to survive as a kid. So, he talks about how you use your intuition when the hairs stand up. In Western society, we're so Lockean in our thinking, so logical, so scientific based, that, if there's not a reason for something, then we tap that down and we're like, no, I'm being overreactive. So in the West, we train people to not listen to their gut. Gavin de Becker says what we need to do instead is, when our intuition kicks up, we need to be equipped with the right tools to be able to chase that intuition and say, what was it that caused the hairs on my arm to stand up, or the hair on the back of my neck? Like, what were the circumstances surrounding my environment at the time that this happened? And he solved so many criminal cases that way, because he's asking questions that nobody else is asking. And he created the Mosaic, which is a profiling tool that our CIA uses. They've been using it for decades now. I think it began under Ronald Reagan's presidency. Gavin de Becker's Mosaic is still used by the CIA for senators and, high profile people in the government, president, vice president. And it's a profiling tool that's used to be able to sort out threats, to deem whether they're legitimate threats or not against these people. Are they life-threatening threats, or is it just some weirdo out there who's, tapping on a keyboard somewhere? So, I've adopted that same methodology, because people ask me, like, how are you not over paranoid, knowing what you know about abusers? How are you not paranoid? How are you not a paranoid father? How are you not a paranoid church leader? And my response is, because I'm educated in that area. I've studied it, and I know the tools that abusers use. I know the techniques that they use. And so I try to equip people with as many of those tools as possible, so that if their intuition is kicked up, they can start analyzing that. Instead of saying, oh my goodness, Matt gives me a weird feeling in my stomach, and then all of a sudden you're labeled an abuser. That's so counterintuitive, and that's so counterproductive. And chaos and paranoia plays right into the hands of abusers. Because they're going to walk into a scenario like that. A church that's really paranoid, these guys are going to walk in and they're going to be the anchor that holds everybody down. And they're going to be the logical person, and they're going to be the one volunteering to write the policy on abuse. They're going to suggest that you write a policy on abuse. So, being equipped with the right tools is essential, because the way we feel about people, the way we think about people, the way we think about ourselves, and how perceptive we think we are, that's all subjective. It's very subjective.
Well, can you give us one tool? What would be one good tool?
Yeah. So I tell people that when I train places, like, I don't do handouts, and I don't, I don't give this information overload. I say, like, I want to boil information down to where my 5-year-old can get it. Like, he understands this, and you can start using this today. So I tell people these 3 things: abuse in plain sight, testing is part of that abuse process. So I tell people, be aware of these 3 things. If you do these 3 things starting today, you're going to have an edge above so many other people, and you're going to start putting the squeeze on would-be abusers. So I tell them, watch people's eyes. Number 1, watch people's eyes. Number 2, watch people's hands. And number 3, listen to people's words in that order. And what I mean by that is watch people's eyes. So I talk about the creepy mall pervert effect. Every single woman everywhere that I go understands what I'm talking about. They know who the perverts are at the shopping mall. The old men who sit and stare and undress women and even teenage girls with their eyes. They know it because you can't misinterpret that look. And even us, you know, like Matt, you've been places where you've caught guys, you've seen guys physically undressing teenage girls with their eyes. You cannot misinterpret that look. It's not a glance. It's like they forget that there's a world around them. They go into this zone where you know exactly what's on their mind. You cannot misinterpret that look. What's interesting is that same look, that same perverted look is happening to children. Take it down to age 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, all the way down to infancy. Pedophiles are looking at those little children the same way these guys at the shopping mall are looking at the teenagers who are going by. Now, why do we see it with the teenager, but we don't see it with a pedophile? Well, again, it goes back to science. We don't see things that we're not expecting to watch, that we're expecting to see. Our reality is made up. The things that we see, the things that we feel, the things that we experience are based on what we expect to see. And that's a quote from Stephen and Susanna's book. Our reality is shaped on what we expect to see or don't expect to see. So none of us are like, you know, I wonder if this guy sitting beside me in the pew, or I wonder if my preacher is sexually undressing a 2-year-old child. You know, like it's not on our radar. We don't even think that way because it's just, it doesn't make sense to us. And we're not expecting it. And abusers know that, by the way. So they have no problem. It's not like they try to hide it. They physically and sexually undress little children the same way that pervert does in the shopping mall. So watch people's eyes.
So you're saying this person's eyes are going to go maybe from kid to kid to kid. Like if you're in a room, you're at a potluck or something, you just notice this guy or this dude
it's not looking around. So it's not like they're, you know, just looking around. Cause I do that, right? Like I go in and I'm in like this hyper vigilant mode. So I'm always watching what's going around me when I'm in a room. It's fixating. Not looking, it's fixated. It's like, you know, an example, I was at a shopping mall with my in-laws, and my father-in-law had my kids on the merry-go-round, what are those things called? The carousel. And I was sitting there with my brother-in-law, and I watched this guy who he was sitting there by himself. He's an old guy, probably, you know, older guy, probably in his mid 50s, early 60s. And there was this one girl, like, she was probably 10 years old, long brown hair, kind of brown skin. This guy, every time this girl came around, every single trip this girl came around on the carousel, this guy, I mean, just deadlocked, like just obsessed with watching this girl. And so I watched this guy, and I'm just sitting back, and I poked my brother-in-law, and I was like, look at this guy. I was like, look what he's doing. He's sitting here alone, sitting right next to the carousel. He's watching this little girl. I was like, guaranteed the next round of kids that gets on, he's going to do this to another kid that looks like that little girl. Sure enough, that girl left with her parents. You know, they go off, and there's another little girl, and I picked her out. I said, that girl right there is going to be his target. You watch. Merry-go comes around, merry-go-round comes around. Sure enough, this guy, I mean, that little girl, he was just deadlocked on her. So the eyes tell the story. And I went and I told the operator of the carousel, I was like, this is going to sound weird. It's going to sound creepy, but I was like, trust me. I was like, I'm an abuse advocate. And I said, that guy over there is, he's targeting these little kids. I said, he's getting off on these little girls going around on the carousel. She said, oh my goodness, look at my arms. Every hair on her body was on edge. She's like, it didn't hit me until you just told me that. She said, my shift last night, She's like, this guy was here. She's like, for my entire shift, it was like a 4-hour shift. That guy was sitting in that same spot by himself, just watching the carousel. And she's like, it didn't even register with me. So she called security and, had him escorted away from the carousel. But, that's my point. Like, the eyes are very telling. So if you see somebody looking at children, young children that way, they ought to be on your radar. I'm not saying they're a pedophile. So, I'm not advocating that people go out and point the finger and like, I know you're a pedophile, because we don't know, unless we have facts presented before us. I think we need to be really careful, but the facts are telling. So that's a fact. That's a non-subjective fact. This person is eyeballing little children like obsessively. And they fit a certain profile, the children that he's looking at. So
you're saying that there's a consistency, there's an attraction to something.
Preferences.
Yeah.
Preferences.
You're picking up on that.
Yeah. And it may be little boys, and it may be a certain age range that's, excuse me, very typical with pedophiles. They have a certain hair type, hair color, skin type, skin colors, color of eyes. It's not 100%, but typically their victims will all look really similar. So then, if that person's on my radar, watch the hands, because part of the testing technique, they'll come up and they'll touch a kid on the shoulder, which is really benign, while they're talking to the parents. And what they're doing is it's intentional, but they're seeing if they can hold the spotlight of attention. Can I maintain your eye contact, or do your eyes keep going to my shoulder that's on your kid's shoulder? Do your eyes keep migrating to my hand? And are you going to say something? Because with me, I'm going to say, don't touch my daughter on her shoulder. That's not okay. If that person was an abuser, they're not going to come, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to come back and start messing with that kid and take it further. So it's that interrupting that process. But what they do is part of the testing technique is, they'll do this. And then if they can hold your spotlight of attention, then the fingers go down and they'll start rubbing on the breast area, which is still benign enough that if you see them do it, they're going to be like, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize, I didn't realize my hand was over here. I just have big fingers and, oh, I feel so terrible. They're going to excuse it away. But then that progresses really quickly. Then they're going to start patting. My dad's thing was pat a kid on the hip. Incredibly benign. But hearing his reasoning behind it is that was parents who teach their kids good touch, bad touch. That's a way to break into a no-touch zone that's so benign to both the child and the parent. And he does this in front of the parents, by the way. But it's so benign that that nobody even flinches at it. And then he'll take it a step further. By he, I just mean pedophiles. They'll take it a step further. Then they'll invite kids into their lap. And they're intentionally having this progression to see what they get away with. And then if nobody interrupts that process at any point along the way, then the abuse begins. And so a lot of that will be in isolation, but some of that abuse will be right in plain sight. And again, that's intentional. And it could be fondling a kid's genitals. Think of Larry Nassar. Larry Nassar abused hundreds of his victims with the parents in the same room, in the examination room. He's having casual conversations with the parents as he's penetrating these victims. And that's all incredibly intentional. It's all on purpose. So had those parents reposition themselves, and you can find articles, if you look up articles that parents have written who were in the room when Larry Nassar was abusing their children, they write about it like, oh my goodness, like, how could I have missed this? Well, they missed it because they weren't expecting it. Larry knew that. And they didn't, some of the parents even questioned, because they were like, at one point, I was like, did he really just, he had washed his hands. He went under a blanket with his bare hands, and then he comes out and he washes his hands. And the parent in the article was like, did he just do what I thought he did? No, it couldn't be. And then she excused it away. So I recommend people get up and move. If you're in a doctor's office, an examination room, with your child, if you're at the dentist, if you're at church, if you're anywhere where there's a room where there are adults and kids together, if you can't see both hands and all 10 fingers of every adult, get up and reposition yourself and move where you can. Always know where people's hands are. When I pray with my eyes open. I never pray with my eyes closed, because I've heard countless stories of victims who are victimized during prayer time because everybody's eyes are closed, and that's when they do it. Funerals, right
Wow.
at the casket, the number of people who are victimized while standing at the casket looking over their dead loved one is mind-blowing. So at funerals, I am on high alert. So watch the hands, watch the eyes, watch the hands, and then listen to the words. Are they being gross in their comments? Are they making sexual innuendos? Are they pushing those boundaries to see what they can get away with? Again, all of that is testing. They're testing people to see how far they can push it. Oh my goodness, you're really starting to blossom. That was one of my dad's lines. He would say that little minor children, you're really starting to blossom. Listen to the words. Are they information mining? Tell me about yourself is a phrase that has me on a level 10 high alert. When somebody walks up to somebody at church and says, tell me about yourself, that's a highly manipulative way to mine information where it seems friendly, and they're not asking a question, by the way. They're giving a statement. They're giving a command. Tell me about yourself. Well, what do we start talking about when somebody comes up and they're making friendly conversation? Our kids. And so I use that as a demonstration whenever I go places. That's what my dad did to the father of the victims that he was charged on. Very first time this guy showed up to church, it wasn't our congregation. It was one across the street from us. Very first time this man walked into church, my dad beelined over to him. Single dad. He has all these little kids. My dad says, tell me about yourself. Oh, well, the guy just put his wife away. His wife had just gone to prison for physical violence against these little kids. So he just poured his heart out to my dad, told my dad everything that he needed to know about these little girls. A week later, my dad was sexually abusing them. That is not grooming. It's testing. So,
Well, we all want to be good parents. We want to be on the alert. We probably think we know enough. I think we probably anticipate that we are savvy enough. And here it is, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. Like you said, not even acts, but the number of individuals. It's just mind-boggling. And so we're all vulnerable. And I appreciate you doing this very difficult work, because this has to be soul draining on some level.
Yeah, it is, but it's, the other side of that is it's rewarding too.
Yeah.
And for me, a big win is when these guys are found out and when they go to prison, because that's where they belong. Not as a punishment, but as a way to keep kids safe, because they do not stop. They will not stop. They cannot stop. So the very best place for them is in prison. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's a reality.
Yeah,
That's
sounds like you
the
would
only
say.
way that we can guarantee our kids are completely safe.
Well, can you give us one last word? Is there any thought or encouragement that comes to mind?
Yeah, there's hope. We're not going to eradicate abuse. I talk about that in the book. Abuse is, since the beginning of time, it's here. As long as we have evil people out there, as long as the devil's alive, abuse is going to happen. The statistics for sexual abuse is going very much in the wrong direction. It's getting much worse, much quicker, because there's much more access to victims with the internet and human trafficking and just the accessibility. Every kid having a phone in their hand, there's an open window into our kids' lives. So I would just urge people, while there is hope, and I see some cultural things starting to shift in a good direction, statistically, the number of children being sexually abused is going very much in a bad direction. So be aware, be really aware, and get educated. and communicate.
Yeah. And so part of that is going to your website, right? jimmyhinton.org,
Sure.
finding
Yeah.
resources there, looking at the book. We'll put
Yep.
links to all that.
Yep. So I have the book. I blog regularly. I podcast regularly. My mom and I do a weekly podcast, and we talk about techniques of sexual abusers. We interview all kinds of people. We've had some pretty cool guests. Judge Aquilina from the Larry Nassar case. We had her on the show, and that was really eye-opening for me. So yeah, there are plenty of free resources there. Then of course there's, I do training and consultations with churches. So there are resources out there. People just, they got to take advantage of them and become educated. We've got to be smarter than the abusers, and they're pretty darn smart.
We could put your email, I'm sure, in the description also if people want to get in touch with you.
Yep, that'd be fine.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jimmy. I sure appreciate your time. I appreciate what you're doing, as difficult as it is. It's helping people and saving lives, honestly. To even go through this is just a horrible thing. So I appreciate you, appreciate your friendship. And if there's anything I can do to encourage you or help you, definitely here for you.
Likewise. I appreciate you, brother.